Have you ever had to forgive someone you love? It's a question I spent 40 years helping other people answer. As a psychologist, I guided patients through the thorny landscapes of betrayal, helping them differentiate between genuine remorse and the hollow performance of it. I thought I had seen every variation, every subtle tell, every well-rehearsed script. I was a cartographer of contrition, but there's a world of difference between studying the map and finding yourself lost in the territory. At 68, retired and a widower, I learned that the most difficult patient I would ever have was my own son. His name is Julian, and he is a portrait of penitence. The problem is, I'm the one who taught him how to paint. So when you hear what I did, when you hear the cold, clinical, and perhaps even cruel-sounding conditions I placed on my forgiveness, I want you to remember that. I didn't just lose money when my son tried to defraud me. I lost the naive luxury of being a father first and a psychologist second. The two roles, once comfortably separate, had fused into a single hardened entity. And as I sit here now, in the quiet of a life I had to rebuild from the emotional rubble of my own family, I need you to understand my story. This isn't just a story about a son who betrayed his father. It's about a man who had to design a clinical trial to see if the son he remembered still existed at all. And if you've ever felt that ache of loving someone whose actions make them a stranger, then I ask you to listen, to really listen. Your story might not be my story, but I promise you the feelings are the same. It didn't begin with a dramatic confrontation, a slammed door, or a tearful confession. Betrayals of this magnitude rarely do. They arrive quietly, like a symptom you ignore for months until the diagnosis is undeniable. For me, it arrived in the form of an email on a placid Tuesday morning. The subject line was bland, clinical, a piece of digital boilerplate from my financial advisory firm. Action required. Update to power of attorney documentation. I almost deleted it. I get dozens of these anodyne notifications a week. But something, a flicker of professional intuition perhaps, made me pause. I hadn't initiated any changes to my power of attorney. My late wife Eleanor and I had set that up years ago with our estate lawyer, my old friend Arthur. It was a fortress, designed with meticulous care. I was the primary, and in the event of my incapacitation, a corporate trustee, a faceless, emotionless entity in Delaware, was the secondary. Julian was not on it. That was a deliberate, painful choice we had made together, a silent acknowledgement of our son's financial fluidity. I clicked the link, entered the series of passwords that protected the architecture of my life, and waited for the page to load. And there it was, a pending document, a durable power of attorney, granting Julian sweeping authority over my assets, my investments, my medical decisions. It was dated a week prior, and at the bottom, a scanned image of my signature. It was a good 40. The slant was right. The loop on the E of Elliot was almost perfect, but it was just a little too clean, too precise. My actual signature, after a lifetime of scribbling prescriptions and session notes, was a tired, arthritic scrawl. This was the signature of a younger man, a man in a hurry. The air in my study grew thin and cold. The familiar scent of old books and lemon polish seemed to vanish, replaced by the sterile smell of a hospital room. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger is a hot, messy emotion. This was something different. It was the detached, chilling clarity of a diagnosis. I was looking at a set of symptoms and seeing the disease in its unvarnished form. This wasn't a cry for help. This wasn't a desperate mistake made in a moment of panic. This was a calculated plan. To execute a forgery of this quality, to know which forms to use and where to submit them, required research. It required intent. It required a profound and terrifying coldness. He had been planning this. While he was calling me for our weekly chats, asking about my garden, telling me he loved me, he was practicing my signature. I picked up the phone and called my advisor, a sharp woman named Patricia. I kept my voice, even the old professional mask sliding into place. I asked about the document, feigning mild confusion. Her voice was cautious. She said my son Julian had submitted it. He had apparently told her I was having some cognitive slips. and that I had asked him to take over to make things easier. He had spun a tale of a loving son stepping in to help his. The narrative was perfect. It was sensitive, caring, and utterly believable, and it was designed to methodically strip me of my autonomy. That was the moment the ice in my veins began to burn. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the story he told. He wasn't just trying to steal from me. He was trying to erase me. He was trying to redefine me as incompetent, to make my objections and my anger the ramblings of a senile old man. He was pathological to justify his own pathology. I thanked Patricia, told her to freeze the request, and to send me all the associated documentation and digital records immediately. I told her it was a misunderstanding I would handle internally. The corporate lie came so easily. Then I hung up and sat in the profound silence of my house, the house where I had raised him, where Eleanor and I had worried about him, celebrated him, and ultimately made excuses for him. The forgery on my screen wasn't just a signature. It was an epitaph for the son I thought I knew. The trial, I realized, had already begun. He had presented his hypothesis that I was a resource to be managed, an obstacle to be bypassed, and the evidence was irrefutable. My son, my only child, had tried to have me declared an invalid in order to rob me blind. The only question left was, what would my response be? The father in me wanted to weep, but the psychologist in me picked up a pen and a fresh legal pad. It was time to take notes. The days that followed were a study in suspended animation. My house, usually a sanctuary of quiet routine, felt like a pressure vessel. The phone would ring and Julian's name would flash on the screen. I would watch it, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest, and let it go to voicemail. Each call was followed by a barrage of texts. First, they were casual. "Hey Dad, just checking in. Call me." Then they grew more insistent. "Dad, is everything okay? I'm getting worried." Finally, they tipped into accusation. "Patricia from the advisory firm called me." "What did you tell her? Why are you doing this?" His panic was a transparent, frantic performance. He was an actor who had just realized the audience was not only aware of the script but had a copy of it in their hands. I didn't respond to any of it. My silence was not a punishment. Not yet. My silence was not a punishment. Not yet. It was a necessary clinical distance. I couldn't engage with the data while it was still screaming at me. I needed to observe it, to understand its patterns, to see the full scope of the pathology before I could even begin to formulate a treatment plan. In that silence, the past came rushing in, not as warm nostalgia, but as a series of overlooked clinical notes. I found myself wandering through the rooms of my house, each one a memory, a piece of evidence I had failed to properly analyze. I stood in the doorway of Julian's childhood bedroom, still preserved with a kind of parental hopefulness, a shelf of baseball trophies, a faded poster of a rock band, a desk where he was supposed to have done his homework. But even then, there were signs. I remembered a parent-teacher conference. Julian was 10. His history teacher, a stern woman named Mrs. Gable, had shown us a diorama Julian had submitted. It was spectacular, a detailed model of a Roman aqueduct. She then showed us the book from the school library from which he had copied it, line for line, pebble for pebble, including a small inconsequential crack in one of the pillars that was present in the book's photograph. He hadn't built a model, he had plagiarized a three-dimensional object. When we confronted him, he wasn't ashamed, he was indignant. He said, "But it's a better diorama than anyone else's, isn't it? What does it matter how I got there?" Eleanor, my dear soft-hearted Eleanor, had seen it as a sign of his resourcefulness. I saw it as a chilling shortcut across a moral landscape. We had a quiet, tense argument that night. She accused me of being too clinical with him, of seeing symptoms instead of a son. She said, "He just wants to please you, Elliot. Can't you see that?" Maybe she was right. But what I saw was a boy who believed the appearance of success was the same as success itself. We celebrated the A grade he got. We ignored the crack in the pillar. It was the first of many such compromises. Years later, when Julian was in college, there was the startup. It was a web design company he launched with two friends. It had a sleek name and a fancy logo, but no business plan. He came to me asking for a $50,000 seed investment. I knew it was a bad idea. I could see the flimsy foundations, the over-reliance on jargon, and the complete lack of a revenue model. But Eleanor was ill by then, her first diagnosis hanging over our lives like a shroud. She wanted to see Julian succeed. She wanted to believe in him so desperately. "Give it to him, Elliot," she had pleaded. "What's money for if not to help our boy find his way?" So I did. But I wasn't a complete fool. I structured it as a formal loan, with a payment schedule and interest, drafted by Arthur. I thought the structure would teach him responsibility. Instead, he saw it as an insult. He acted as though I had given him a gift, but wrapped it in barbed wire. He made 2 payments, then the excuses started. The market was tough. A client backed out. His partner was unreliable. The stories were always plausible, always detailed, always someone else's fault. The startup folded within a year, the $50,000 gone. He never mentioned the loan again. When I gently brought it up, he acted wounded, as if I were a predatory lender chasing him down for a few bucks. He reframed my prudence as a lack of faith. And Eleanor, weakened and wanting peace, had asked me to let it go. "We have enough, my love," she'd said. "It's not worth the fight." So I dropped it. Another piece of data filed away. A father's love, I learned, is often a synonym for a willfully mismanaged ledger. The most painful memory, the one that twisted in my gut like a knife, was one of my last lucid conversations with Eleanor. She was frail, her body failing, but her mind still sharp. She held my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Promise me, Elliot," she whispered, her voice thin as parchment. "Promise me you'll always look out for him. He's not like you. The world is sharp, and he has no armor." I promised. Of course I promised. What man wouldn't? And now, sitting in the silence of our home, I saw how that promise had been perverted. I had seen it as a sacred duty to protect him. He had seen it as a license. My love was his armor, yes, but he had used it not for protection, but as a shield to hide behind while he sharpened his own daggers. My promise to her had become his greatest asset. He knew I would always be there to bail him out, to absorb the consequences, to let it go. He wasn't counting on my love anymore. He was leveraging it. The catalyst, the moment my grief and detachment finally hardened into a plan, came not from Julian, but from his ex-wife, Chloe. She was a good woman, a steady presence who had tried for years to anchor Julian to reality. They had a son together, my grandson, 10-year-old Leo, a bright, wonderful boy, who was the only uncomplicated joy in my life. Chloe called me on the 5th day of my silence. Her voice was tense. "Elliot, I'm sorry to bother you, but you need to know what Julian is saying." I listened, my knuckles white on the receiver. Julian, in his desperation, had launched a preemptive strike. He had been calling our extended family, my sister Martha, his aunts, his cousins, and weaving a heartbreaking story. He said I was in decline. He said I was becoming paranoid, forgetting things, making wild accusations. He'd told them about the incident with the financial firm, but he'd twisted it. He claimed I had asked him for help, then forgotten and panicked, accusing him of theft. He was painting me as a tragic figure, a man losing his mind and casting himself as the burdened, loving son trying to manage an impossible situation. He wasn't just trying to defraud me anymore. He was trying to discredit me to anyone who might believe my version of events. He was laying the groundwork for a legal competency hearing. That was it. The final piece of data I needed. The disease was more advanced than I had imagined. It was malignant. My promise to Eleanor to look out for him had a new terrible clarity. The most important way to look out for my son was to stop the man he had become from destroying what was left of our family, my reputation and my grandson's future. My sadness curdled into something cold and hard. It wasn't about revenge until it was. But it wasn't revenge on my son. It was revenge on the pathology that had consumed him. I was going to treat the disease, and the first step in any treatment is to remove the patient from the environment that enables the sickness. His environment was a world without consequences. I was about to build him a new one, brick by painful brick. I finally picked up my phone. I didn't call Julian. I called Arthur. Arthur, I said, my voice devoid of the tremor I felt in my soul. It's Elliot. I need you to look over Eleanor's and my old trust documents, and I need to retain you. We have a problem, and I have a hypothesis I'd like to test. Arthur lived in a minimalist house across town, a place of clean lines, glass, and polished concrete that was the architectural opposite of my own comfortable, cluttered existence. It was a reflection of his mind, sharp, uncluttered, and intolerant of nonsense. He was a retired estate lawyer, and in our younger days, we had been each other's professional confessors. I'd unload the psychic burdens of my patients, and he'd unload the labyrinthine greed of his clients' families. We often joked that we were in the same business, managing human pathology, just on different sides of the DSM. He poured me a glass of scotch, the good stuff he saved for funerals and crises. "All right, Elliot," he said, settling into his leather chair. "You sounded like you were about to declare war. Talk to me." I laid it all out. The email from the advisory, the forged signature, Julian's frantic calls, and finally, Chloe's warning about the narrative Julian was spinning to the family. I spoke in a monotone, the way I would present a case study to a group of graduate students. I kept the emotion out of it, focusing on the sequence of events, the behavioral patterns, the clear, premeditated intent. Arthur listened, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "The little monster," he said, his voice a low growl. "After everything you and Eleanor did for him. Elliot, this is simple. We get a lawyer, not me, a litigator, and we crush him. We file a police report for the forgery. We sue him for attempted fraud. We send a cease and desist to every family member he's lied to. We burn his little world to the ground. It's the only thing a creature like that understands." His response was the righteous, furious roar of a loyal friend. It was the anger I should have been feeling but had sublimated into cold analysis. I was grateful for it, but it wasn't my path.
Oh!
I said quietly. "That's a war, and in a war everyone loses. Leo would be caught in the middle. My sister would be forced to choose sides. It would be a bonfire of public humiliation. Julian would become a martyr in his own mind, the victim of his cruel, powerful father. He would never ever have to confront the reality of what he did. It would just become another story he tells himself." Arthur frowned. "So what? You're going to let him get away with it?" "No," I said, leaning forward. "I'm not going to let him get away with it. I'm going to cure him. Or more accurately, I'm going to create a controlled environment in which he has the opportunity to cure himself." This was the part that made Arthur look at me like I was the one with cognitive slips. I explained my idea. Julian, I knew, would soon pivot. When his panic and accusations failed to get a response, his next move would be a performance of profound remorse. He would claim he had hit rock bottom. He would announce he was getting help. He would beg for forgiveness.
Sit?
It was the next logical step in his playbook. His apology, I said, the words feeling sharp and clean in my mouth, is a hypothesis. His willingness to accept real, tangible consequences will be the clinical trial. Only then will we know if the cure has taken. What the hell does that mean in English, Elliot? It means I'm going to agree to reconcile. I'm going to agree to family counseling. But with a condition. The therapy will be structured around him, creating a concrete, legally binding restitution plan. We're not going to talk about my feelings of betrayal. We're not going to explore his childhood traumas. We are going to open a ledger, and he is going to make a plan to balance it.
Oh.
You and I, Arthur, are going to define the terms of that ledger. Arthur stared at me, then a slow smile spread across his face. "You magnificent bastard," he breathed. "You're not going to sue him in a court of law. You're going to sue him in a court of therapy. You're going to use his own weapons, the language of healing and recovery against him." "It's not against him," I corrected gently. "It's for him. It's the only path I see to any kind of authentic outcome. If he's genuinely remorseful, he'll welcome the chance to make amends in a tangible way. If he's not, well, the data will speak for itself." That's when we went to work. For the next week, my study became a war room. Arthur, his legal mind whirring back to life, pulled up the files on the irrevocable trust he had helped us design 15 years ago. It was a masterpiece of paranoia, and I had never been more thankful for it. Eleanor had insisted on it. She called it the Rainy Day Fund, but we both knew it was the Julian Fund. Our main assets, the house, the stock portfolio, her inheritance, were locked inside it. It was managed by a corporate trustee, and its instructions were ironclad. It was to provide for my comfortable living until my death. After that, it was to be split, with a significant portion going to a charitable foundation in Eleanor's name, and the rest held in trust for Julian, to be disbursed in small annual increments. He couldn't touch the principal, ever. The attempted POA was a clumsy battering ram against a steel door. He never stood a chance of getting the bulk of the money, but he could have drained my personal accounts and caused immense damage before the trustees stepped in. But the real work was what I called the balance sheet of expectation. Arthur thought the name was grimly hilarious. I didn't have to hire a forensic accountant. I was the forensic accountant of my own life. I had records. Oh, I had records. For 2 decades I had kept a private ledger. Every loan for a down payment on a car he later crashed. Every credit card I'd paid off after a business trip to Vegas. The $50,000 investment in his failed startup. Even the smaller things, the European vacation for him and Chloe, I'd funded as an anniversary gift. The rent I'd covered for 6 months after he'd been laid off. I didn't do it out of resentment. I did it because as a psychologist I knew that unacknowledged patterns are doomed to repeat. It was my own private clinical chart on my son. I had never shown it to anyone, not even Eleanor. It felt too cold, too transactional. But now it was my primary tool. Arthur and I spent days turning my meticulous notes into a formal, itemized spreadsheet. We included dates, amounts, and a column for reason given. The final number was staggering. It was far more than the $50,000 for the startup. It was a lifetime of bailouts, a 6-figure sum that represented a black hole of entitlement. While we worked, I engaged in a bit of my own quiet intelligence gathering. I maintained my communication with Chloe. I explained my plan to her, and she was quiet for a long time on the other end of the line. "He'll never do it, Elliot," she said, her voice full of a weary sadness that I was only just beginning to understand. "But God, I hope you're wrong." She agreed to be my source on the ground. She wanted to protect Leo from the fallout, and she knew Julian's performance better than anyone. She was my control group. Arthur's own subplot provided a strange counterpoint to my obsessive planning. His daughter, a wonderful woman who was a successful architect, was engaged to a man Arthur openly detested. A poet who hadn't written a poem in 5 years and lived off a trust fund. The man is a charisma vacuum, Elliot. Arthur would fume, taking a break from my spreadsheets. He's a black hole of ambition. "What are you going to do?" I asked him. "Nothing," he sighed, rubbing his temples. "I told my daughter I think he's a sponge, and she told me it's her life to live and her mistake to make. She's 35. She's right. He was learning to let go of control, to trust his daughter's judgment even when it screamed against his own. And here I was, meticulously constructing a system of absolute control over my son's life. "You see the irony, don't you?" he asked me one evening, gesturing at the mountain of paper on my desk. "It's not irony," I said. "Your daughter is a responsible adult making a questionable romantic choice. My son is a 40-year-old man who just attempted a felony to avoid getting a job. The pathologies are different." Finally, the plan was ready. We had the trust documents, clearly outlining Julian's lack of access. We had the balance sheet of expectation, a 20-page, itemized indictment of his entire adult life, and we had the legal framework for the restitution agreement, drafted by Arthur, complete with clauses about wage garnishment, asset liens, and mandatory quarterly financial disclosures. It was a document of breathtaking severity. It was a cage built of consequences. Now all I needed was for the subject to enter the laboratory. And right on cue, as I predicted, Julian's strategy shifted. The angry, accusatory texts stopped. They were replaced by a long, rambling email. It was a masterpiece of the genre. It was filled with words like brokenness, shame, and rock bottom. He wrote that his actions were a desperate cry for help from a man who has never felt adequate in the shadow of his brilliant father. He said he had started therapy. He was attending Debtors Anonymous meetings. He was ready to do the work. And he ended with the sentence I knew was coming. "All I want, Dad, is a chance to earn back your trust and ask for your forgiveness." I read the email, a perfect specimen of rehearsed remorse, and I felt nothing but the cold, clean click of a lock falling into place. I picked up the phone and called him. His voice was tentative, hopeful. "Dad, Julian," I said, my voice calm and even. "I got your email. I am willing to consider a path toward reconciliation. I agree that counseling is a good idea. In fact, I insist on it." I could hear the relief in his sharp intake of breath. He was already celebrating his victory. "However," I continued, "I have a condition." The silence on the other end of the line was thick with confusion. Julian had been prepared for a fight, for tears, for a lecture. He had not been prepared for a term sheet. "A condition?" he repeated, his voice losing its carefully constructed humility. "Dad, this is about our relationship, about trust. It's not a business deal." "On the contrary, Julian," I replied, my tone as level as a freshly paved road. "For 20 years our relationship has been a business deal in which you were the sole beneficiary. We are now restructuring that deal to introduce a modicum of balance. The condition is this: the family therapy you're so eager to begin will have one and only one agenda item. We will not be there to excavate the past or process our feelings. We will be there to facilitate the creation of a legally binding multi-year restitution plan. You may choose the therapist. I find that giving the subject a sense of agency, however illusory, can be beneficial to the process. But the goal is non-negotiable. My forgiveness is not on the table. It is the potential outcome of a long and arduous experiment. Your willingness to participate is the first variable we will test." The silence stretched on. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to reconcile my words with the image of the soft-hearted, emotionally weary father he had intended to manipulate. He was trying to play chess, and I had just announced we were playing by the rules of chemistry. "Restitution," he finally stammered. "For what? The 50,000? Dad, I know I messed up with that, but I can't just 50,000. I let out a short, dry laugh. It was a genuinely amused sound, and I think it scared him more than any shouting would have. "Oh, Julian, the startup loan is merely a footnote, a single line item. The principle on which we will be calculating restitution is substantially higher. But don't you worry about the numbers. I've had them prepared. All you need to do is show up and be willing to do the work, as you so eloquently put it in your email." He started to bluster, the victimhood narrative rising to the surface. "This is insane. You're trying to punish me. This isn't forgiveness. It's cruel. What would Mom say?" Weaponizing Eleanor. It was a low, desperate move, but an expected one. "Your mother," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming cold and hard as granite, "is the reason I am giving you this one final chance to behave like a man of honor. Her memory is the only thing stopping me from taking Arthur's advice and filing a police report for forgery and attempted grand larceny. Do you understand me? This is not a punishment. This is the exit ramp I am offering you from a highway that ends in a prison sentence. You can take it, or you can continue on your current path. The choice is yours." You have 24 hours to provide me with the name of a licensed family therapist. If I don't hear from you, I will instruct Arthur to proceed. Goodbye, Julian." I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking, not with anger, but with the adrenaline of a surgeon who has just made the first deep incision. There was no going back. The panic when it came was exactly as I'd predicted. Chloe called me that evening. "He's losing his mind, Elliot," she said. "He called me screaming. Said you'd hired a lawyer, that you were blackmailing him. He kept saying, 'What am I supposed to do? What does he expect me to do?'" "What did you say?" I asked. "I told him it sounded like Elliot expects you to pay back the money you took," she said. Her voice was flat. "He didn't like that." Julian's next move was to rally the troops. He went on a full-scale offensive with our extended family, just as he'd done before. But this time his story was different. I was no longer a confused old man. I was a cruel, vindictive tyrant, a monster holding a past mistake over his son's head. He was the prodigal son who had come home, only to find his father had barricaded the door and was demanding payment for the fatted calf. My sister Martha called me, her voice thick with misplaced sympathy for Julian. "Elliot, what are you doing? He's your son. He told me he's in therapy. He's trying to get better. And you're treating him like a criminal. You have to be the bigger person here. Money is just money, but family is for..." This was the moment. The point where the infection threatened to spread. I had prepared for it. "Martha," I said, calmly, "I'm about to send you an email. The subject line is a history. I want you to read it. I'm also sending it to your husband and to our cousins Robert and Sarah. After you have all had a chance to review the document, I'd be happy to discuss what it means to be the bigger person. But I will not have that conversation before then." I hung up before she could reply. Then, with a steady hand, I attached the balance sheet of expectation to a new email. The 20-page, itemized spreadsheet detailing every loan, every bailout, every single dollar Julian had siphoned from me over 2 decades. I didn't add a single word of commentary. The numbers were colder and more eloquent than I could ever be. I listed the recipients: Martha, her husband Tom, my cousins. I paused, then added one more name to the list: Chloe. She deserved to see the full picture. I hit send. The result was a profound and immediate silence. No one called me back that day, or the next. The family exodus had begun. The rally of support for the poor, victimized Julian evaporated the moment his chief financial enablers saw the true staggering scope of their nephew's long con. I imagined them sitting at their kitchen tables, looking at the spreadsheet, and suddenly recalling the few thousand they'd loaned Julian for a business opportunity last year, or the $500 for a car repair. My ledger didn't just indict my son, it validated their own quiet, nagging suspicions. I had not just armed myself, I had disarmed his entire narrative. The morning of the 3rd day, I got a one-line text from Julian. It contained the name Dr. Anya Sharma and a phone number. The takeover was complete. The subject was in the lab. The first therapy session was a masterclass in passive aggression. Dr. Sharma's office was tastefully neutral, all beige tones and abstract art, a room designed to soothe. Julian sat hunched in his chair, the very picture of a wounded soul. I sat upright, a large leather-bound binder on my lap. Dr. Sharma was a calm, intelligent-looking woman in her 40s. She began with the usual opening gambit. "Thank you both for being here. This is a courageous step. Julian, your father mentioned you had something you wanted to say to him." Julian took a deep, shuddering breath, a perfect performance of emotional effort. "Dad," he began, his voice cracking, "I am so sorry. I know I broke your trust. I was in a dark place, a desperate place, and I made a terrible mistake. I hate what I did, and I hate what I've put you through. I held up a hand, not to him, but to Dr. Sharma. "Doctor," I said, my voice polite but firm, "I appreciate my son's sentiments. However, as we discussed, our time here is not for the purpose of emotional catharsis. It is for a practical, action-oriented goal." I placed the heavy binder on the low table between us. The thud it made was deeply satisfying. My son and I are here to operationalize his remorse. This binder contains a preliminary financial assessment that will serve as the foundation for the restitution plan we have agreed to create together. Shall we begin with page 1? Julian stared at the binder as if it were a venomous snake. His face, which had been a mask of sorrow, was now pale with shock. The carefully constructed penitent dissolved, replaced by a cornered, panicked man. He turned to Dr. Sharma, his voice rising. You see? You see what I'm dealing with? This isn't therapy, it's an audit. He doesn't want to heal, he wants to control me. He's always been like this, cold, clinical. He's never had any empathy. He was trying to pivot, to make me the patient, to cast my structured plan as a symptom of my own pathology. It was a good move, a classic defense mechanism. But I had chosen the battleground carefully, and I had counted on one thing. A good therapist respects a clear therapeutic goal. Dr. Sharma did not take the bait. She looked from Julian's desperate, pleading face to my calm, expectant one. She then looked at the thick binder on the table. A lesser therapist might have tried to mediate, to split the difference between feeling and finance. But Dr. Sharma, to her immense credit, was a true professional. She understood structure. Julian, she said, her voice even and gentle, yet carrying an unmistakable note of authority. Your father has proposed a tangible, action-based framework for rebuilding the trust that has been broken. In therapy, we often find that words like sorry are the beginning, not the end, of the healing process. Action is what makes an apology real. Your willingness to engage with this framework, to look at the concrete consequences of your actions, is in itself a powerful therapeutic indicator. It shows a commitment to accountability. She turned her gaze to the binder. Let's not think of this as an audit. Let's think of it as a map. A map that shows where things went off course, so we can work together to plot a new way forward. She reached out, her hand hovering over the binder. May I? I nodded, pushing it towards her. Julian looked utterly betrayed. He had come here expecting an ally, a professional who would see his pain and validate his narrative of being the wounded son of a cold, demanding father. He had intended to use the therapeutic space as a weapon against me, a psychologist. Instead, Dr. Sharma had just validated my methodology. She had taken my clinical trial and called it a treatment plan. The power in the room, which he had tried so desperately to seize, had settled firmly on my side of the table. Dr. Sharma opened the binder. I had placed the summary page on top, the balance sheet of expectation, with its neat columns and its horrifying final number in bold at the bottom.
She read it.
Her expression unreadable. She then turned to the first itemized page. All right, she said, her voice matter of fact. The first entry is dated April 2004. A payment of $5,400 to West Side Auto. The reason given is down payment for a reliable car for work. Julian, can you tell us about that? Julian just stared at her. I don't remember. Let me refresh your memory, I said calmly. It was a blue Honda. You needed it for your job as a pharmaceutical sales rep. You totaled it 6 months later street racing with a friend. You told me you'd been sideswiped by a drunk driver. Your insurance didn't cover it because you'd lied about your driving record. I know this because the insurance investigator called me when you listed me as a reference. Every muscle in Julian's face tightened. We weren't just talking about money. We were talking about the lies that had always surrounded the money. Dr. Sharma was unflappable. Okay. Let's move to the next one. June 2007, $12,000 to cover high-interest credit card debt. That was Chloe's fault. Julian mumbled, grasping at straws. She was a spender. A new text message notification pinged softly on my phone. I had asked Chloe if I could text her during the session if he tried to blame her. Her reply was instantaneous. I glanced down. It read, ask him about the business trip to Macau he took by himself that month. I have the credit card statements. Is that so? I asked, looking up from my phone. Because my understanding is that this debt was incurred during a solo business development trip you took to Macau right after you were laid off. A trip Chloe knew nothing about until the bill arrived. Would you like me to call her and put her on speakerphone so we can clear this up? The color drained from Julian's face. He shot a look at me that was pure, unadulterated hatred. The mask was gone. The penitent son was gone. In his place was a trapped animal. This was the process. For the next 45 minutes, Dr. Sharma, with the placid demeanor of a tour guide, walked us through Julian's life of financial wreckage. The failed startup, the investment in a friend's screenplay, the 3 separate occasions I had paid his back rent to avoid his eviction. With each item I provided the cold, factual context, the stories he had told me, and the truths I had later uncovered. It was a systematic, methodical dismantling of the mythology of his own victimhood. He had no one to blame. The evidence was too specific, too overwhelming. His desperate counter-moves became weaker and weaker. He tried to argue semantics. He tried to claim some were gifts, not loans. He tried to retreat into sullen silence. But Dr. Sharma and I just waited patiently for him to re-engage with the process he had agreed to. The cage was perfectly designed. His only way out was to chew off his own leg. The session ended not with a breakthrough, but with a stalemate. Dr. Sharma gave us an assignment. Julian was to take the binder home, review it, and come to the next session with a proposal for a payment plan for just the first 5 items. A small, manageable first step, she called it. Julian didn't take the binder. He stood up, his body vibrating with rage, and walked out of the office without a word. The family, what was left of it, had completely abandoned him. My sister Martha called me 2 days after I'd sent the email. Her voice was thin, apologetic. "Elliot, I had no idea," she said. "He told me you two had a disagreement over a loan. He never, Tom and I are so sorry we bothered you. Is there anything we can do?" "No, Martha," I said gently. "There's nothing to be done. The situation is being handled." The power shift was total. Julian was an island, and the tide was going out. He had always relied on a web of enablers, of soft hearts and open wallets. I hadn't just cut him off. I had sent a warning flare to the entire network. He was on his own, for the first time in his life, with nothing but the stark, ugly truth of his own balance sheet for company. The second therapy session, a week later, was the one I knew would be decisive. Julian showed up, which in itself was a data point. He looked gaunt, exhausted. The swaggering confidence of the con man and the rehearsed humility of the penitent were both gone. He looked like what he was, a 40-year-old man who had just been handed the bill for his own life. He didn't look at me when he came in. He sat down and stared at the floor. Dr. Sharma opened the session gently. "Julian, thank you for coming back. Did you have a chance to think about the assignment?" Julian nodded, still not looking up. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single crumpled piece of paper. He slid it across the table. I picked it up. It was a handwritten proposal. It was clumsy, almost childlike in its simplicity. He proposed to pay me back $200 a month. At that rate, he would clear the debt from the first 5 items on the list, a total of around $28,000 in just under 12 years. It was, on its face, a pathetic offer. It was a gesture so small as to be insulting, but I wasn't looking at the number. I was looking at the act itself. He had engaged with the data. He had looked at the numbers, accepted them as real, and made a proposal based on his actual, not imagined, circumstances. It was the first truly honest financial document he had ever produced in his life. I looked over at him. His eyes were red-rimmed. He finally met my gaze, and for the first time, I didn't see a performer. I saw a man in profound actual pain. "It's all I can do," he whispers, his voice hoarse. "I got a second job delivering for a catering company at night. After my rent and my child support for Leo, this is what's left. It's not enough. I know it's not. But it's what I have." And here was the moment of truth. The father in me, The part I had suppressed for so long felt a pang, a deep, aching pity for this broken man who was my son. The plan had been to force him to this point, but seeing him here, stripped of all his defenses, was brutal. But the psychologist in me knew this was the most critical phase of the experiment. Pity was a poison. Pity was what had enabled the sickness for decades. Acknowledging his effort, without absolving him of the consequences, was the only path forward. I folded the piece of paper and put it in my pocket. "All right," I said. "This is a starting point. Arthur will draft a formal agreement based on this proposal. It will include clauses for increases as your income improves. It will be legally binding." Julian nodded, a single desperate tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "Okay," he said. And then he shattered. It wasn't the resentful, angry explosion from the first session. It was a complete and total collapse. A wave of gut-wrenching sobs overtook him, his whole body shaking with the force of it. He curled in on himself, his head in his hands, and he wept. He wept for the mess he had made, for the lies he had told, for the man he was supposed to have been. He cried with the deep, racking despair of someone who has finally, truly hit rock bottom, without a safety net in sight. Dr. Sharma looked at me, her expression a careful mixture of professional concern and a question. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The hypothesis was not disproven. The data was starting to come in. This felt real. The performance was over, because he was too broken to perform. The confrontation I had engineered was not the one I had expected. I had prepared for a final, bitter battle of wills. Instead, I was witnessing a surrender. He wasn't just surrendering to me. He was surrendering to reality. In the weeks that followed, a new reality began to take shape. Julian signed the restitution agreement without a single protest. The first payment of $200 arrived in my bank account on the first of the month. It was, without a doubt, the most valuable $200 I had ever received. He kept going to therapy with Dr. Sharma, alone this time. He kept working his 2 jobs. Our communication was sparse, limited to brief, factual texts about his payment schedule or a question about Leo. The emotional minefield of our past was off limits. We were building something new on a foundation of a single brutal truth. You are responsible for what you break. The vindication I felt was not the triumphant, fist-pumping victory I might have once imagined. It was quiet, somber, and deeply bittersweet. I had set out to prove my son was a calculating sociopath whose penitence was a lie. In the end, the data was more complex. My son was a weak man, a pathologically dishonest man, a man who had done a monstrous thing. But my clinical trial, in its brutal way, had not destroyed him. It had forced him to confront himself, and in that confrontation a flicker of something new, accountability, responsibility, perhaps even honor, had been born. I had lost the son I had made excuses for my whole life, but I had possibly, just possibly, created the conditions for a man to grow in his place. I called Arthur and told him what had happened. He was silent for a moment. "So," he said, "the cure is taking. The early results are promising," I said, "but the subject will require long-term monitoring." We had a new trust drawn up. The old one was dissolved. The new one still provided for me, but upon my death Julian would not receive a lump sum or even an annuity. Instead, the trust would match, dollar for dollar, every payment he made on his restitution plan. The money he earned back he would inherit. The rest, the vast majority of it, would go directly into a protected trust for my grandson Leo to be accessed when he turned 25. My son would never be a rich man. He would never live a life of ease. But every dollar he inherited would be a dollar he had earned through honest work and tangible amends. His apology was no longer a hypothesis. It was a long, slow, arduous process of repayment. And in that there was a strange and terrible kind of grace. It's been 2 years now. The quiet in my house is no longer the tense silence of a pressure vessel. It's the peaceful, settled quiet of a life lived on my own terms. My garden has never looked better. I spend my afternoons reading, not because I'm trying to escape, but because I enjoy it. The ghosts of the past have been, if not vanquished, then at least relegated to their proper place. They are case files, closed and archived. Every month on the 1st, I get a notification from my bank. A $200 deposit from Julian. Last month it was $250. He texted me, his first non-financial communication in over a year. Got a promotion. I'm a shift manager now. I texted him back a single word. Good. It was enough. Our relationship is not what it once was. The easy affection, the shared jokes, the comfortable illusion of a happy family, that's gone forever. It was a casualty of the truth. What we have now is something sparser, more formal, but in its own way, more real. It's a relationship built on a single shared reality, acknowledged by both parties. There is no performance. There are only actions and their consequences. I see my grandson, Leo, every weekend. Chloe and I have become close friends, bonded by our shared experience of loving and surviving Julian. We take Leo to the park, to museums, to baseball games. I am funding a college savings account for him, the one that will become his trust someday. In him I see all the promise of a life lived with integrity. I am not just protecting his future from his father's mistakes. I am trying to model for him what accountability looks like. Sometimes in the quiet of the evening I think about the choice I made. Was it cruel? Did I go too far? It's a debatable point. Some would say a father's love should be unconditional. That I should have forgiven him, absorbed the loss, and moved on for the sake of family. They would say I used my professional knowledge as a weapon, that I met my son's emotional crisis with a cold, unfeeling calculus. And I understand that perspective. It's a warmer, more comfortable way to view the world. But I've spent a lifetime studying the patterns of human behavior. And I know that unconditional love, when misapplied, is not love at all. It is enablement. It is a license for the recipient to continue their destructive behavior, secure in the knowledge that there will always be a soft place to land. My son didn't need a soft place. He needed solid ground. He needed to feel the full, unyielding weight of his own choices. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about data. Forgiveness, in my professional opinion, cannot be demanded. It cannot be granted on the basis of a few well-chosen emotional words. It is a byproduct. It is the natural result of verified, consistent, trustworthy behavior over time. The apology is the press release. The changed behavior is the story. So I put my son in a laboratory of my own design. I subjected him to a rigorous, painful, and deeply uncomfortable experiment. I did it not to destroy him, but to see if there was anything left in him to save. The most loving thing I could do for the man who tried to rob me wasn't to forgive him. It was to force him for the first time in his life, to earn it. The cure wasn't my forgiveness. The cure was his acceptance of the fact that some things, once broken, can't be fixed. They can only be repaid. Have you ever had to draw a line like that with someone you love? A line between helping and enabling, between compassion and consequence. It's a lonely, difficult place to be. I'd be interested to read about your own experiences in the comments below. Every story is different, but the terrain is often the same. And if this story, my story, has resonated with you, I'd ask you to please like this video and subscribe. There is strength in knowing you are not the only one who has had to make an impossible choice. Thank you for listening.